Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're listening to The Legal Hour with me, Muhammad Bismillah, and my co-host Selena on Ramadan Radio 87.9, which is being streamed online, ramadanradio.org, and on Facebook. Feel free to call us, text us, WhatsApp your feedback, questions, and comments. The number is 077 614. The number again, 077 614. Today we're going to be talking briefly about the verdicts that were delivered last night, UK time, in the USA, a bit about the police stations in the UK, and how everyone is entitled to free and independent legal advice. But before we go into all of that, a few words from my co-host, Selena.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and Ramzan Mubarak. Hope everyone's been enjoying Ramzan so far and making the most of it. As my co-host has given the preamble, we will be covering the importance of having a solicitor at the police station and why it's so essential. So we'll be going into that in detail. You're here with us on the Legal Hour, listening to Ramadan Radio London. If anybody does have any questions or anything that they want to share with us, then get in touch. Our number is 077 614 60614.
I have a question. Why did you decide to go into the legal profession?
It's something that I really enjoyed at university. I took law up during my A-levels as part of one of the courses that I did. And my teacher was an ex-barrister, and the way that he taught the subject, it was one of those subjects that I always looked forward to attending. So it was a natural choice for me to then go on to study that at university. And again, at university, I had an amazing lecturers who used to be judges and barristers. So it was a real good flavor of the law that I got from there, and just the legal work experience that I was also fortunate enough to have. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I really enjoyed the studies, really enjoyed in terms of criminal law, the reason I did that was because I enjoyed the sort of the academic part of it, and also the practical side, actually physically going to court, to police stations, working with clients, and really trying to make a difference for an individual in their case. And sometimes you have a lot that's stacked up against them, and you're the only person that's there sort of representing them and furthering their interest and their legal interest.
Well, so that's interesting. Just sorry to cut you. It's actually the lecturer who initially got you interested in, but that's quite interesting. Sometimes it's a teacher who can get you interested into a topic.
I agree. And even sometimes you can have really, really good material or a good subject. But if the teacher is someone that teaches in such a monotone style, or there's no sort of life in them in terms of how they deliver the classes, I feel sometimes that can also have the opposite effect.
Yeah, and it can make a very interesting topic very boring.
Very dull, yes, I agree.
That's quite interesting.
What was your what made you go into law?
I actually initially I enrolled onto a business course. I was always told to go into law initially, but I thought to myself I wasn't good enough. You needed to have a certain background, so I enrolled onto a business course the first year. Similar to your story, the lecturer I had for one of the modules, he was a previous defense solicitor, and he was teaching one of the modules. And there was one class in particular where he wanted us to describe how the civil court system works in the hierarchy.
Right.
And I managed to deliver that, study it, and deliver it to a class. And I found it really interesting. And in the lecture, he showed everyone quite a classic film called 12 Angry Men, the black and white version. that got me really interested, and then I went on to study law. I changed course and went on to study law because that gave me sort of the interest, the confidence that, look, I've memorized the whole civil justice system. This is something I can do.
Hmm.
So
Oh,
it
that's
gave me that
really cool.
confidence.
And 12, going back to 12 Angry Men, was that the film about the deliberation that jurors
Yeah, initially, yeah, it was that's exactly what it was about. Initially, at the start of the deliberations, they seem to be going one way, and then at the end of it, they go the opposite way. And um,
I
it's
think
always interesting how the mechanics of a jury. I've never been on a jury, but I would
yeah.
like to know what actually happens in the deliberation rooms. On which note, coming on to the verdicts that were delivered yesterday in the Derek Chauvin trial in the USA. Um, I'm sure all of you heard 3 guilty verdicts. He's now bail has been withdrawn, and he could face up to 40 years in prison. Um, but the, it would be they deliberated for 10 hours roughly. Um, it would be interesting to know. We'll never know. No one will, apart from the jurors, what happened and what was discussed.
Yeah, I think
But
that's
then,
always a mystery, even
yeah,
in UK courts, as to how a juror reaches their verdict. I think that's always a mystery behind the closed doors.
yeah, even when representing clients at court doing trials, you feel when the jury go out, it's going to go one way, but then they come back with like the most unusual verdict, which just like surprises you.
Hmm.
Um, but
And
yeah,
that's the one of the elements of the job. You're always taken by surprise.
yeah, that's true. That's so true. And have you always wanted to go into criminal law?
To be honest, I criminal law was one that I tried to stay away from. I
Mm.
mean, okay. Let me say that again. I always enjoyed criminal law, and I always wanted to go into it. But one reason why I didn't actually want to pursue it initially was because I did think, you have to do these really long hours, sort of police stations late at night, and just that aspect of it. I thought, okay, let me try other things, but it worked out in such a way, like all my experiences and when I got my training contract and just the way everything fell into place, it's criminal where I ended up. And I do enjoy it. And I don't, and now that I'm practicing crime, I don't know if I would like any other area of law. But my initial hesitation in going into crime was the long hours, the late night police stations, being on call. That was one aspect for me personally, why I didn't really want to pursue it 100% to start off with. But
Mm.
having said that, I think um, I currently don't do those longer hours. The firm that I do work for, they are quite flexible. I mean, I have a little daughter as well. So I think with things like that, initially prior to going into a profession, especially being a female, those were considerations that I personally did have. But I would say that I do very, very thoroughly enjoy my job. Um, it's one of those things. It still feels very academic. I'm always learning. You're always having to go back to your books and consult and understand, and then also advising your clients. It's like a real work that you see and how it shapes. Being part of the criminal justice system. It's really rewarding work.
Yeah, and whilst like yeah, attending police stations is one aspect of it, but there's so many different strands, and you find your niche within the area. Um, and as you say, it's like I wouldn't want to go into any other area. Um, uh, sorry, I've just seen a question. I wouldn't want to go into any other area. It's quite exciting. It's quite interesting. Um, and plus, you're trying to you know defend your client as adequately as you can and put their case forward.
Mm.
For
I think
example,
the
some of the
other. sorry to cut you there. I think the other interesting thing where when you're speaking to people about crime, the common sort of misconception that they have is, how can you defend someone that you know is guilty, or, those kind of questions. Are those questions that you've had as well?
Yeah, I've had those types of questions. I mean, how can you? Yeah, but it's people, the ones who ask those questions, they don't appreciate how the law works.
No.
Um, it's interesting because there is quite an overlap with criminal law and some of the Islamic teachings. Um, the one that always comes to mind is, every action will be judged by its intention.
Mm.
Similarly, there's two aspects to the majority of criminal offences. There's the intention, which is known as the mens rea, the mental element, and then there's the actual act. So, for example, to be found guilty of murder, the physical element is having the deceased, that's the end, but you must have an intention to kill or cause grievous bodily harm. So, you must have that intention at the same time. If you don't, in English law, then you can't be guilty of murder. You'll be guilty of manslaughter. Um, so yeah, it's the mechanics. I mean, I do have planned somewhere later down the line to maybe write a book with a established mufti as to this overlap between so many. Even I was reading somewhere the way duress works in English law is very similar to how it's interpreted in Sharia law.
Mm.
Um, so yeah,
There's a
that is quite an interesting aspect. I've had one question, it, which I don't think either of us are qualified to comment on. Is the legal profession halal for Muslims? Um, I think that's a question for a mufti, someone who's more qualified. Um, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree. There's a second question. Are solicitors boring? Is the profession boring? Well, hmm.
we probably sound boring. Um, if you're basing it on us, then yes, solicitors are boring, but generally they're not.
I don't agree. I don't think we sound boring.
um,
Far from it. No, solicitors are not boring. That's the answer. And is the profession boring? No, it's not. It's full of action, and there's so much going on. And especially if you're in the criminal defense, section, then it's not boring at all. You've got the most interesting array of cases with the most bizarre set of facts at times. You've got, police officers that you're going into consultation with. You're trying to get fair disclosure for your client. You go into court, you're against the legal advisor, you're against the prosecutor, probation, who are there. They're there to help the clients, but sometimes you feel, okay, what side are you actually on? You've got the bench, the district judge, and you're trying to make your legal arguments, and you're the person there really trying to advance your client's legal rights. And
you mentioned like three terms there, which a lot of listeners and a lot of clients are not familiar. Prosecutor, legal advisor, and probation.
we will demystify those.
Well, the prosecutor, I always refer to them as the lawyer for the police. That's the easiest way I find, rather than saying CPS or Crown Prosecution Service. I
Mm.
just say that the prosecutor is the lawyer for the police, um, and we're the lawyers for the defense. Um, what
Yeah,
the legal advisor is, they're like they have all the knowledge on the law and they guide. If you're in a magistrate's court, they guide the bench, which is the lay magistrates volunteering their time to hear cases. They're not legally qualified necessarily, but they get all their legal directions from the legal advisor, who sits normally right underneath them
and
physically as
just
well.
just to interject there, and what they bring with them is a wealth of their knowledge from their communities, and their backgrounds. So they're supposed to put that element of
Through the
kind
bench.
of the awareness. Yes, the bench.
Yeah, they're from that locality. But yeah, it's presenting your client's case. I mean, one of the arguments in the Derek Chauvin trial that the defense were making is causation, i.e., the officer's actions were not the cause of death. Obviously, that argument was unanimously rejected by the jury, as is evidenced by their verdict. Derek, is it Derek? Derek Chauvin. I think I've got his name right. Yeah, Derek Chauvin. That's the officer's name in the USA. Um, yeah, so they were those arguments were unanimously rejected by the jury, but nevertheless, the defense had those expert reports to sort of challenge causation. Obviously, that's their job. But yeah, it was unanimously rejected.
That was the case in the US.
Yes, the one that the officer the footage was making its way around.
Yes, and it was the sort of catalyst behind the Black Lives Matter movement as well that we saw across countries.
Yes, I think on the border of that state, a similar incident happened recently where an officer mistook her gun for a taser, and
Yes.
that resulted in a death of another individual. And I think those something is good. I mean, you don't hear much in the news. I'm not sure whether many listeners are aware that last week, Met police officer was jailed at Southwark Crown Court for breaking a man's leg, and the judge, open quote, said this was a clear case of racial profiling, end quote. Carl Abrahams is the victim in that case. But it's good to read around and read beyond what the mainstream media deliver.
I think it
That's not to take away from the fact, sorry, that the
Yeah.
police do have a difficult job to do. I think
No,
very
I
few people would want to do that job. Often, you're in a situation where you know, you do put yourself in danger. But I think it's a balancing exercise. One, Islamically, as we've been taught, you shouldn't be extreme either way. The middle path is always good, and
yeah,
have a good balance.
everything
Not
in
to
moderation.
Islam doesn't teach us extremism, middle ground. So don't be extreme in either way, either direction.
I agree. And I think it just in general, it just raised a lot of awareness about Black Lives Matter. The issue raised a lot of awareness, even to where we saw in different parts with statues being taken down and the whole sort of modern day the slavery background. So it did strike a chord with a lot of people. And even sort of coming down to things like literature. I remember there was quite a few groups, WhatsApp groups about literature, and trying to incorporate those to young children from an early age. So they have a range of books about different cultures, backgrounds. So I think it kind of integrated in a lot of areas, not just in terms of the laws and policing. It definitely filtered through, I found, in other areas as well.
Yeah, just with to take what with Black Lives Matter, with every profession, whether it's lawyers, doctors, you know, every profession, you're going to have your black sheep, or someone who's going to do stuff that's not in keeping with the profession, not in keeping with their duties. You're always going to have these bad eggs, but yeah, I mean, there was those protests in Bristol that were taking place. There was that protest that was taking place after Miss Everard's body parts were found, and there's that harrowing video of the officer, you know, using quite some brutality against, I think it was a ginger-haired lady.
Yeah, that made its rounds.
Yeah, that's been investigated by the Home Secretary, and yeah, everyone knows what the conclusions are. But I think that video speaks volumes. That video does speak volumes.
I think that leads us nicely in terms of our topic of discussion today, which is the importance of having a solicitor when you are arrested for an offence and taken to the police station. You know, it's an environment where you're taken into a police station, police custody, where you are surrounded by officers. So it can be quite an intimidating environment, especially for those who've been arrested for the very first time and don't really have any previous experience. And even for those who have been arrested for a number of times, it may not be intimidating for them, but you know, some of them, they kind of know the drill, know what to expect. But I think those individuals more so realize and understand the importance of having a lawyer. But we're sort of speaking more about those who haven't been in trouble.
Just to dissect the point about when you're arrested initially, you're read out, you're under arrest, you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defense. Yeah, I can't remember the rest. Yeah,
Something which you later rely on court.
anything you do say may be given in evidence.
Yeah, and against you.
I mean, we hear this, probably heard it in movies, soaps, books, we've read it in books, but what does it actually mean? It means the moment those words are said to you, you don't say anything. You have a right not to say, you have a right to silence. And the starting point is, once you are arrested, you should exercise your right to silence until you've spoken to a solicitor, and you're entitled to free and independent legal advice. But so it's always important to exercise your right to silence on arrest until you've spoken to a solicitor. I've had loads of clients recently, officers execute a warrant at the address, they arrest the individual, and they start asking for like passwords to devices, asking whether this device belongs to you. In essence, you don't have to answer these questions, and you shouldn't until you've spoken to a solicitor. Often one feels overwhelmed by the mere presence of police officers, and it can be nerve-wracking. But the starting point is not to answer anything until you've spoken to a solicitor.
So just to clarify on that, is that something that you said after the caution or before the caution?
After the caution. And if ordinarily anything said before the caution legally is not admissible ordinarily, but anything said after the caution certainly can, because that's what the caution essentially says. Anything you say after this point can be used against you.
I just want to add something on that. It's quite interesting because it's what we find sometimes is even when someone does decide to exercise their right of making no further comment or right to silence, I don't know if it's the same for you, but I find in a lot of case papers that I've looked at and matters that have gone to court sort of afterwards, after the whole police station ordeal, is that as soon as somebody normally is cautioned, automatically they would say something. I find that in a lot of cases, maybe it's just a human psychology that, you know, as soon as they've been told that they're being arrested for something and they're given their caution and their rights and entitlements, that they don't have to say anything. A lot of times people do say something and that's then taken as a significant comment, which is then used against them. For example, if it's like a theft offense and they've just been given the caution, and the person's like, oh, I didn't take it, it's not mine, or oh, I just found it somewhere and I held on to it. And then thereafter they decide to make no comment. What they have just said pretty much straight after the caution then becomes a significant comment. So even if they then go on and exercise their right and say absolutely nothing, that statement which they made straight after the caution is still used as evidence against them.
Yeah, I can understand the temptation to speak when when you are confronted by police or asked questions by police. I had a similar situation where I was stopped. This was when I changed my number plates to um, when I changed my number plate from to a private plate, and the insurance system hadn't updated. I then went. I think I was coming to drop some stuff off at my in-laws. I was driving back. It was in the Oval area, and there was a police car van following me, and then the blue lights were switched on, and I parked up, saying, "Oh, your car's not coming up as insured." Then I just told them, like, I showed them the insurance certificate. I just updated it recently, and then they just carried out their checks and said, "Yeah, everything's fine," and just sent me on my merry way. But yeah, I think if I had said nothing in that situation, the outcome may have been different.
No,
But there, it was a clear-cut case. I think you would have been represented. I know if I had
might be a conflict.
maybe a conflict of interest, but yeah,
No,
maybe if I would
no,
call
I
on.
mean, in that situation, though, you wouldn't have been given a caution. It's just, you've been stopped. They're making their check saying that there's no insurance showing up on your vehicle, but you know very well that you have changed your insurance, and it's just a matter of, the information being updated on the end of your insurers.
So you don't think? I think if I didn't offer that information to the police, you don't think that I would have been arrested?
No, of course, I'm saying in that situation, it was good that you did, and there's nothing for you to not. There's no reason as to why you shouldn't have offered that information. It's good that you did. Otherwise, you end yourself up in a situation which is easily avoidable, and there's no need. I think what we're saying
And
initially.
and yeah, I wouldn't have been able to attend the walima.
No, yeah, that's true. And I would wonder, where are you? um, Yes, that's true. No, I'm in that situation is very different. Of course, if anyone's ever in that kind of
And
situation,
remote interviews weren't
no,
prevalent at the time, so
they weren't. And
like you could
when
have
you're
been.
arrested and taken to a police station, you can be held there for up to 24 hours. So
Hmm.
if you still try to exercise your right of silence at that point and didn't say anything, I don't think that would have been quite fruitful. But what I'm trying to say
Yeah.
is, in these situations, of course, someone should give that information. It doesn't, I mean, the other thing is, you don't need to be a lawyer. You just use your common sense. In those situations, you tell them, like, this is what's happened. I have got insurance. And it's just the paperwork being updated, or electronic systems being updated, and you've got the proof with you. So end the story there.
The thing is, even though you know you've done nothing wrong, there was a sense of nervousness. I mean, he came up to my side door. Oh, take the key out of the ignition and step out of the vehicle. I was like, what?
Yeah, I studied psychology for A levels, and we had a particular subject about authority, and when somebody is particularly in uniform, how it sort of, what it does is that authority figure, it kind of really sets that in an individual's mind. And it was such an interesting topic. It's like, if an officer appeared without uniform to one that appeared in uniform, the experience that the person would have in dealing with them would be quite different. And it's just that imposing authority with their uniform. And I think it's something, as you grow up, like, you kind of put the two together. So it was really interesting in terms of the cognitive behaviors and how it impacts individuals, and the whole aspect of, like, obedience and stuff like that. So it's interesting, even though you're a lawyer who deals with, police officers daily, when you're on the other end, it's a very different experience altogether.
Yeah, it was really different.
And I used to find that sort of pre-COVID, when you come through, border controls, and coming from a holiday or anything, and going through the airports, even though you're not carrying anything and you haven't done anything, it's still that kind of feeling when you're going past security or police officers and stuff like that. I think it's just naturally built in, from all the things that we've learned over the years, and what we're taught about officers and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just to clarify, although this is for all the listeners, like I know what you're like when you go to the police station. You stand for your client no matter who's in front of you, whether it's the superintendent, the sergeant, the detective, no matter what their rank is, you would not back down.
Oh,
And
thanks. I'll pay
really
you. I'll pay you later.
no, this I'm sorry, we're both professionals and we can't, we have to, we can't be bribed. That's one of our codes. I'm very professional, and
Yeah.
no,
But
I
it's
mean,
not the
I
most
think no, it's
impartial.
just to clarify, because it's interesting that, because as an individual, when you're just driving and you're stopped by the police, it's very different. I mean, I find myself as an individual, like I can be quite shy at times, but when I'm at court, when I'm at the police station, that kind of goes out the window, because you're not there for yourself, you're there for your client. And like you're the person that delivers on their behalf.
Mm,
They're not there to say anything, or that they can say for themselves. You're there to do it for them. And you are there, and it's your duty to obtain the best result for your client, obtain as much relevant information, and you're there to make a difference for them and secure the best possible outcome for your client. So I think it's really interesting when you're in that role, automatically is that that's the vision that you have. Um,
yeah, because
and
you're the only
that's
person
carried
the
out.
client has to protect their
Mm,
rights,
mm.
and you're the only one that they look to. Mostly they can't contact, well, they are entitled to a telephone call, but obviously if it's on connected to the case, but yeah, you're the source of help for the
Mm.
client. So, but the emphasis is, once you're cautioned, exercise your right to silence until
I-
you've spoken to a solicitor.
some people, when they are arrested, they have a general idea, as to what it could potentially be about. But I think it's always best to have a solicitor.
Do you ever get this where clients say, "Oh, if I don't say anything or if I go no comment, doesn't it make me look guilty?"
Yes, I have had that, where they feel that there's a need to say something, or they have to. But it's like, if you go in without a solicitor, you really are going in blind, because you're just thinking, oh, that's what I just need to do. Just say, just answer questions and just give information. Whereas when you have a solicitor, their role there is to protect and advance your legal rights, obtain as much relevant information from the officers as possible as to the reason for the arrest, what the investigation is, what evidence do they have, the strength of that evidence. They have that information from the officers, which would ordinarily not be available to the client until they're in an interview situation. And that's when they sort of get the information through the series of questions that's asked to them. Um, and the importance of having a lawyer is that you can assess that. You can assess the strength of the information, and they're still investigating. So sometimes the evidence isn't even made out, and what the client can do at times by answering questions is incriminating themselves further, or doing the police's job for them.
Mm.
Um, and other times, I mean, it is important to speak. A client maybe doesn't want to, or whatever the reasons are.
It's just the whole nervousness of the
Yeah,
situation.
I
You can
think
say
I
the
think
wrong
having a
stuff.
solicitor there really kind of helps. Is that level of reassurance, and you can tell them, okay, look, these are your instructions that you've just told me what's happened. This is the evidence against you. I would advise you to tell the police all of this. There's nothing for you to, if anything, it will help, because they're still investigating, and maybe sometimes they'll raise something where the police officer then needs to go out and further investigate those matters that have been raised by the individual that's arrested.
I think it's important, just coming back to what you said initially, the academic aspect. So in the UK, we have an adversarial system, which essentially means the police, CPS, police/CPS, they bring the case and they have to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. You don't have to do anything, hence the client, the individual has a right to silence. That's your legal right not to say anything, and it endures throughout the whole process until the conclusion of the trial. Just like the Derek Chauvin trial, he exercised his
I
Fifth
think they said
Amendment.
Fifth Amendment,
Yeah,
yeah.
Fifth Amendment, right. So he didn't give evidence in his trial. Similarly, in the UK, that endures until the end of the trial. And the good thing is, at the police station, the advice is free and it's independent,
And it's
regardless of your means. If you're a millionaire, you're still entitled at the police station to free and independent legal advice.
yes, regardless of how long it takes. So you could be at an interview, police station for, I don't know, as a lawyer for an hour, anything up to 5, 6 hours or longer. I mean, a person's can be detained for up to 24 hours. That's the normal course. Obviously, that can be extended further if need be in particular cases. But you have, it's not just confined to the interview. Even after the interview, before the interview, if you want to consult with your solicitor, then you can do that on numerous occasions, however many times you want to. So there's no fee attached to that. It's free, and which I think is a really good thing, because people can be arrested for all sorts of things from all different backgrounds, and it's not good to know that you have lawyers that you can speak to, and you don't have to pay an absolute fortune for doing so.
Well, you don't have to pay anything. I mean, yeah, indirectly it comes through taxes, but there's no immediate cost to the individual or direct cost to have yourself represented.
The other thing is, your conversation with your lawyer is legally privileged. And what that means is it's confidential and it stays between you and your lawyer. It's not something that can be told to the judge at court, to the police officers, not even if they demand it from your lawyer. It's something that they wouldn't part way with in terms of information, because that in itself is legally privileged, and there's a lot of sort of things around that which ensure that it stays that way. In terms of legal privilege, that's one thing. And of course, what you do discuss with your lawyer, some things with the client's permission. For example, if you're at court and you've just given your lawyer instructions, they will let you know, okay, some of this stuff I will have to put forward to the court as long as the client's happy with that. Maybe you'd want to expand on that a bit further.
Just had a question about the adversarial system. The opposite of that is the inquisitorial system, where the state, the legal system, the courts play an active part in getting to the bottom of the issue. So that's an inquisitorial system. They have that in the USA and other countries, but the USA is the one that stands out the most. So, and that's where all parties play a part in, as I've said, getting to the bottom of the matter at hand. Whereas in the UK, it's just a CPS/police who collate all the evidence and then present their case to a judge and a jury, who then decide on the case.
And defense solicitors, I mean, in certain cases, we'll instruct our own experts. I mean, the prosecution can have an expert that states one thing. An expert opinion, you can get another expert from the defense based on your client's instructions. So we really do build a case as well, to put forward and counter the arguments that are put forward by the prosecuting authorities. And that's when it takes place in a trial.
Yeah, you've got to. you've got to. I'm just looking at a question: which is better, an inquisitorial system or adversarial? It depends who's asking the question from different perspectives, and who is it better for? I think it depends who's asking the question, whether it's the court, the client, the prosecution. But yeah, um, um, I think if someone makes an allegation against you, they should prove that you're guilty. Um, I think that's the starting point.
I mean, to break it down,
Because
it's like,
false allegations are quite, whilst we don't hear about them, but only yesterday, I think it's in one of the side pages of the Metro this morning. A barrister made a series of false rape allegations against another barrister, and the barrister she made the allegation against was already in a relationship. The article says she fabricated a number of emails to herself, faked. It was very sophisticated. Faked her own kidnapping and her stabbing. Yes, and she stood trial at Oxford Crown Court. I think recently, and she's been given a custodial sentence. So whilst it's not on the front page of the news, and I mean, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. False allegations, and just on the note of front page of the news, when I picked up this morning's Metro, I was quite surprised to see that the front page was not the verdicts in the USA that were delivered yesterday evening. I don't know whether that was because the Metro had already gone to print by that time, but there was a medium-sized article contained within the paper about those verdicts. Naturally, I don't know why, but I expected it to be front page news, given that it's such a rarity.
and the whole controversy that it kind of created.
Yeah, I think that certainly. The fact that there was a small article, medium-sized article about it in the newspaper, but one would expect a story of that magnitude, given that its occurrence is rare, it would make its way to the front pages. But
I think going back to the police station and having the importance of having a lawyer there, it's also, not only does the lawyer obtain further relevant information as to the nature of the arrest and the reasons behind it, you can also advise your client based on their instructions, what's the best way forward, and having that kind of foresight of dealing with these types of cases on a routine basis, doing the case prep and also going to court, you can almost, in most cases, see where it's heading, and the impact that the police station interview would have later down in the line in terms of formal proceedings at court. And I know that you say this a lot of the times, is that what happens in a case is almost like the directions paved from the police station. So it's actually quite vital, the decisions that are undertaken at that stage, and also the way in which the case is dealt with, what kind of issues are raised, if somebody does have a defense, for example, what issues are raised at that stage, the role on the investigating officer to then carry out further investigation. And also, like, when the matters come to an end at the police station, is the issue of bail, whether someone's going to be remanded into custody to then appear at court, or whether they'll be released under investigation, which means they're just, without any bail conditions, they're just released until further information arises, or whether there are bail conditions attached. I know I'm saying quite a bit, and you can hopefully grab onto those. But even with bail conditions, sometimes you can have quite stringent conditions that you have to comply by, or conditions which may not be reasonable. So when you have a solicitor there, again, you've got that safeguard, somebody who knows the procedures, who knows the police officers' codes, who can hold them accountable and really question, is this necessary? And even with detention, is this necessary? And really be there to protect your interest. So I always think it's always in an individual's interest to have a solicitor there.
So once the interview's over with at the police station, what are the potential outcomes?
So the potential outcomes once everything's finished is you can either be charged with the offence. So that's if they have sufficient evidence they feel against you to then charge you. So you're so straight charged, you've got a court date to then go to. Another alternative could be that you'd be released under released with bail conditions. So the investigation is still pending against you, and they've got some conditions attached to ensure that no further offences are committed, or some of the common conditions are not to contact a particular individual, usually the complainant, or not to go to a particular address, usually where the offence is said to have taken place, and to also perhaps register at the local police station so they know that you stay in touch and not absconding. So those are some of the common bail conditions, so that you can be released with bail conditions. Another one is you can be released under investigation. So with that one, there are no bail conditions attached. You're not free in terms of, it's not the end of the matter. The police are still investigating. They don't have sufficient evidence to charge you at that stage, but they have just released you pending further investigation. So they can then call you again, ask you to be re-interviewed or attach bail conditions or give you a charge.
But you are free in the sense that there's no restraint on your liberty or your ability to, there are no conditions.
Yes, so there's no conditions attached, but you do have a pending investigation sort of in the background.
Yeah.
And as and when it does come to light, you'll be notified of that. And the other one is that there's no further action. So that's one where it's a complete end. There's no investigation carrying on from there. That's the end of the matter. They've closed the file and they're like, yeah, that's it. We're not charging you. There's no bail conditions. There's no further action.
Yeah.
Unless, caveat to that, unless new evidence comes to light and then they reopen the case. But usually that doesn't quite happen. That doesn't really happen.
I've just noticed the time. Let's just summarize what we've been through today. And some of the questions that have come through, I think if anyone's listening out there, if anyone is, then it'll be interesting to get the Islamic perspective, how Sharia law interacts, or the similarities or differences between Sharia law and English law, and perhaps even have a discussion on air as to the differences and the similarities. But we've been through briefly the verdicts that were delivered yesterday evening UK time in the USA. We've briefly spoken about what you should do if you're if you're arrested for an offence, or what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't answer questions until you have a solicitor, until you've spoken to a solicitor. And we've briefly given an overview as to what happens at the police station once you are arrested. That's a general overview. Do feel free to...
And in a nutshell, the importance of actually having a solicitor, it's not something that should be overlooked. Even if you feel it's for such a simple matter, it's so vital to have a solicitor present. I mean, sometimes people feel it would just take a lot longer, but I mean, you're going to be there for 24 hours.
Oh, 60 seconds.
60 seconds. So yeah, we need to round up. But in essence, you need to have a solicitor. You don't have to, okay, you don't need to, but you should have a solicitor. And solicitors are not boring. And that was one of the questions earlier, solicitors boring? No, they are not boring. And criminal defense is a very rewarding job. It's
And it's a vital part to our free and democratic society.
yes, the
Have
right
that legal
individuals.
representation. But we'll go into more detail next week. And so do tune in, do keep your comments and messages coming through. I'll give if you just wrap up with.
Well, yes, I hope you've enjoyed this show, The Legal Hour, and found it quite informative. That's why we're here, to try and help demystify and to give more information and raise awareness. So inshallah, we will all meet again next week. Ramzan Mubarak again to everyone, and Jazakallah khair for listening to us, and Assalamu